Good morning, everyone. My name is Magda Wilson, and I will be moderating this second session from the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. So we're going to follow the same format as the previous session. We have 1 hour and 3 presentations. So we will have the 3 presentations first, and then we'll take questions at the end. So the first presentation is on industrialization and economic growth in Lesotho by Leseko Maketa. The second presentation is on special economic zones in industrial development by Futaka Mashau. And the third presentation is on empowerment of small-scale agro-processors and its implications for industrial development, and it will be presented by Benjamin Manasoe. So we go straight to the first presentation by Leseko. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Leseko Maketa. I'm from the National University of Lesotho in the Department of Economics. And my presentation will be based on analyzing the relationship between industrialization and economic growth in Lesotho. So the idea of the industrialization leads to economic growth and development can be traced back to the 19th centuries. And as we look at the schools of economics and the schools of thoughts, you will realize that Rostow's stages of economic development has highlighted this belief that industrialization actually leads to economic growth. And the classical theories have sustained this belief, and the growth theories have also amplified the belief that indeed industrialization actually leads to economic growth. In the recent literature, we have also verified that through some authors that industrialization actually leads to economic growth. Now, in the context of Africa as a whole, the industrialization has been adopted as the 9th Sustainable Development Goal of the 2030 Global Agenda of Sustainable Development. This has also been extended to the African Development Bank, where they have adopted industrialization as the strategic development goal in 2015. And this is one of the African key areas. This is one of the 5 key areas of the African Development Bank focus to industrialize Africa. This even goes beyond to African Union, which upholds trade and industrial development as one of the key programs. Now, this regional recognition of industrialization can only point to one important thing: the relevance of industrialization in Africa for socio-economic development. Now, despite the adoption of industrialization in African context, and also the emphasis on the policies to industrialize, policies on industrialization in Africa, when you look at the statistics, particularly in Africa, they do not commemorate this commitment of emphasizing industrialization. For instance, when you look at the industrial value added as a percentage of GDP in the entire sub-Saharan Africa, it has significantly dropped from around 36% in 1981 to about 27% in 2021. And also, when you look at the manufacturing value added as a percentage of GDP in the entire sub-Saharan Africa, it has also significantly dropped from 18% to all-time low of 10% in 2012. Even though it is slightly improved in 2021 to 12%, it has never reached that 1981% of 18%. One of the key contributing factors to the drop that we see here is that most of the exports from Africa are the primary products, and also they are mainly low skill intensive. So that mainly reduces the region's integration of manufacturing global value chains and ultimately explains the lack of improvement in the contribution of the manufacturing value added to GDP of the African exports. Now, the case of Lesotho is quite interesting because it's in contrast to what we see in the entire region of Africa. For instance, when you look at the industry value added as a percentage of GDP, it has actually increased from 1981, from 22% in 1981 to about 35% in 2021. And also, when you look at the manufacturing value added as a percentage of GDP, it has also increased from 8% in 1981 to about 15% in 2021. And this is largely the key contributing sectors are the textile, the clothing, footwear, food processing, and mining related sectors, and all thanks to the AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act of the United States, and also the World Trade Organization's agreement on textile and clothing that has actually propelled our textile exports reaching about $305 million in 2020, and thus making us Lesotho one of the largest exporters of garment to the US. Now, despite this upward trends in the case of Lesotho, there's one question that still remains. The question is, now, to what extent does industrialization in Lesotho has impacted the socio-economic development of Lesotho? The relevance of this question is based on the recent gloomy economic outlook of Lesotho. For instance, in the last decade, the government's debt to GDP has never gone below 35%. Also, even though we can see that on our current account balance, it has actually reduced from 7.9% to about 2.8%, but we are still on the negative side of the balance of payment. Now, what makes that even worse is that when you look on the fiscal deficit, it's consistently increasing from 3.8% in 2017. We are now at 5.8% in 2021, and most of the fiscal debt is financed through the capital transfers from South Africa. And also, we have recorded about 50% of the poverty headcount in 2021, and the unemployment rate has increased from 23% in 2018. We are now at about 33%. Now, when you look at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, when they were analyzing whether industrialization is actually the driver of the sustained prosperity, one of the key conclusions that they made there was that there is no one-size-fits-all development model. And also, when you look at the recent literature, even though they argue that the empirical studies argue that indeed there is a positive relationship between industrialization and economic growth, but most of the literature that we have found is that that relationship is not statistically significant. And so this kind of research has been thoroughly researched in the literature, but to the best of our knowledge, we haven't seen any study that tried to analyze the relationship between industrialization and economic growth in Lesotho. Therefore, the literature in the case of Lesotho is still scant. Therefore, it was against that background that we investigated the extent to which industrialization affects economic growth in Lesotho. I'm not going to go into the methodology, but I just want to assure you that we have actually ascertained that we have to use the ARDL approach, the autoregressive distributed lag approach. So we have done all the tests, and then we also ascertained that there is indeed a long-run relationship between industrialization and economic growth in Lesotho. We have also did all the diagnostic checks after the methodology, after running all the tests. And then we also have some instrumental variables that we used except for economic growth and industrialization, which is proxied by the industrial value added in Lesotho. But now when we discuss our main findings, in the interest of time, I'll only be discussing the relationship between value added and only economic growth in the case of Lesotho. So I'll not say anything about other control about other control variables. Now, these are the empirical results and discussions. So our empirical results in a short run actually show that if you look at the green color, they actually show that the industrial value added in the short run is statistically significant and positively affect economic growth, both in the current period and also in the next period. For instance, in the current period, a percentage increase in industrial value added increases economic growth for about 11%, while in the next period it's about 17%, that is in the short run. In the long run, we still see the same results that are positively, statistically significant and a positive relationship, even though the results are, the impact is diminishing in the long run, since 1% increase in the industrial value added only increases the economic growth of Lesotho by about 2%. Now, in conclusion, according to the World Bank, when they talk about the industrial value added, they state that industrial value added is the net output of a sector after adding up all inputs and subtracting intermediate inputs. So what this means in the case of Lesotho is that for Lesotho to optimize its industrial value added in an effort also to optimize its effect on GDP growth rate, it needs to promote innovation and processing at all levels. But this can be particularly achieved if we strengthen the value chains of the key products where Lesotho has the main comparative advantage. So we focus on our comparative advantage and therefore extend the private sector credit and subsidies to the products where we only have the comparative advantage. Not only, but mainly where we have the comparative advantage. And also we focus on export promotion policies on semi-finished goods and the finished products and the promotion of involvement in regional and global value chains. Also, beside the national all-inclusive national strategic development program policy document, in the case of Lesotho, we haven't come across any specific policy document dedicated to industrialization in the case of Lesotho, and also given the relevance of industrialization in Lesotho. Therefore, we put forth the recommendation that there is a need for industrial policy in Lesotho, and this is not only important in addressing some of the specific challenges faced in the sector within the framework of the National Strategic Development Program, but it also indicates to the investors the key subsectors that have comparative advantage in Lesotho, and also give that as a direction of interest of the government. And also one last thing is that the Lesotho National Development Corporation, which is in charge of industrialization in Lesotho, has a very big role to play there to facilitate industrialization and also to ensure that there is a conducive investment climate in Lesotho, and also the development of manufacturing, processing industries, mining, and commerce for promotion of economic growth in Lesotho. So with this, thank you so much.
Thank you, Leseho. We'll move straight to the next presentation by Vupaka Mashao on special economic zones. Could you please load the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. My colleagues from TIPS will assist with the presentation. So I'll be presenting on the role of special economic zones in industrial development, specifically looking at Africa. And the presentation is from a paper that I had to write for this conference. So everything is extracted from there. So the abstract talks about the main drive for this research and this paper. So just to see whether special economic zones, which are also referred to as SEZs, key drivers for economic growth, regional integration, and global competitiveness. Because, you know, through the years, there's been so much debate on whether they're effective or not, on whether they're needed, you know, as an industrial development tool. And diverse aspects will be looked at, such as export activity, relevance to interregional trade, the importance of allowing SEZs to solicit debts or not, and whether they should be looked at as profit-making institutions, you know, opposed to how they are currently configured, and also looking at other facets of SEZs, management, marketing, ownership, and so forth. You can go to the next slide. So there are many definitions of SEZs from around the world. The one I used is from the UN, that they're just clearly demarcated geographical areas. They're quite different from other, you know, industrial enclaves or estates, because instead of having, you know, a fence and a boom gate like you would see in your industrial parks, SEZs have are specially demarcated. So they have what we call CCAs, which are usually have an oversight from, you know, a revenue services and so on. So the wall or demarcation around it would be quite different from any other enclave. And this concept of special economic zones has been there for ages. You know, we look back to around 150 BC in countries such as Egypt, Greece, Germany, you know, the Draconian free cities, and so forth. So the concept has been there for many, many years, although, you know, in other areas of research, some people say SEZs have been in existence from the 1960s. But if we look back in history, this concept has always been in existence. So SEZs became prominent from 1960 onwards, where they were advantageous among the Asian tigers. So these are countries such as Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, where they were very, very successful and made a huge difference in terms of economic development. Special economic zones to date account for approximately 130 million jobs worldwide, with between 7% and 8% exports contribution. And, you know, and in South Africa, for example, we have about 11 SEZs, which have attracted 25,000 jobs and 29 billion in investment. So there's been a lot of contribution. And in that schematic, you can see the timeline for SEZ implementation in Africa. So around the 1970s in Africa, we've seen Liberia, Senegal, and Egypt implement SEZs. Although in other areas of research, it has been argued that Mauritius was the first African country to establish an SEZ. So we have different, you know, reports around this literature. And then in the 80s, we saw more African countries introducing the concept. In the 90s, we had much, much more countries introducing the actual concept. And, you know, we've seen a good turnaround there. We have, you know, countries like Mozambique, where even today some SEZs are actually referred to as industrial parks, but so different countries refer to them interchangeably. But in other countries, for example, South Africa and Zambia, an industrial park and an SEZ are totally two different entities and so forth. So to date, we have around 237 SEZs in the entire Africa, and and only in 38 countries, out of the total 54. So we have 16 African countries which still do not have this concept of SEZs. You can go to the next slide. So research shows that there is a consensus that African zones have underperformed, in the exception of Mauritius and the partial exception of Kenya, Madagascar, and Lesotho. And this is because even though they can really work, they have to be a huge diversification of offerings, especially around monitoring and evaluation and risk mitigation and good management. And the rationale for designating SEZs in countries like South Africa is still, questioned around whether the SEZ model is effective as a developmental tool or not. And because South Africa, as an example, has 11 SEZs and a pipeline of 6 potential SEZs, then, there's just more questions around this concept on whether to continue designating more and more SEZs or just limiting them and focusing on what is currently designated and ensuring that it is effective. So in the next slide, you just see is just a map showing what has currently been designated within South Africa and which provinces do not have. So we have provinces like the Northern Cape, which currently do not have an SEZ, but they have 2 SEZs in the pipeline, and one is a green hydrogen SEZ, and as we're leapfrogging towards a green trajectory, for the entire continent and the world at large. It is one of the interesting concepts in SEZs to designate. Thank you very much. We go to the next slide. So we have had different papers and research around this whole concept, where different researchers have looked at whether SEZs have been successful in different countries or not, and what have been the impediments. So in some areas, the impediments have been inadequate workforce, where people, for example, in that specific country, do not have the skills required to run SEZs, and also to work within the different industries that have located within SEZs. We have had cases where in Bangladesh and India, the challenges have been electricity supply, where it has been difficult for companies that located in SEZs to function efficiently. And also, in some areas, it has been proximity to ports, to highways, also reliable transport systems, which were a challenge. We have seen in many countries that initially, when the concept started, they preferred to have their SEZs closer to ports of entry. But as the years progress and the concept diversified, we have seen SEZs that were designated far from ports and so forth, because it doesn't really matter where an SEZ is. What matters is the competitive advantages of a certain region, and then ensuring that the infrastructure around that is efficient to ensure that there's trade activity and export activity and so forth. Thank you. When we go to the next slide. So what I did is I ran an input-output modeling exercise just to prove whether special economic zones are beneficial as an industrial development tool in Africa. I looked specifically at South African special economic zones, and the SEZs have had around 25 billion in public fiscus that has been used or rolled out to the various SEZs. But the 25 billion is a hybrid of national fiscus and provincial fiscus. The national fiscus has been just over 10 billion since the year 2013, when an SEZ fund or dedicated SEZ fund was introduced. So that is what I used for this modeling. So the modeling is a Leontief input-output model. It follows various assumptions which are listed. You also see them in my paper. I will not go through those just for the sake of time. But what happens is from Statistics South Africa, which is our national, data collection resource or department, I got what we call a standard and uses table, so input-output matrices for the entire economy. And I use what we call a Leontief just to invest the matrix, do some multiplication, and then I shocked the system with the 10 billion rand that has been dedicated to SEZ, just to see how then the entire matrix reacts to that contribution. So we may go to the next slide. So that slide just shows how Leontief input-output modeling works and the various steps that I had to take in this exercise. We may go to the next slide. So that is just an explanation of how it went, and we'll just see very soon that the contribution of SEZ is quite a lot. They do make a huge difference in an economy, especially in the case of South Africa, in the transport sector, the manufacturing sector, in technology, and also in employment creation when we look at the backward and forward linkages. So in the next slide, that is the output, some of the output that I got. You can see a huge contribution towards, for example, exports. And, one of the visions of an SEZ program is exporting activity because that makes a huge contribution to an economy. So we see, for example, over 18% there, also in employment creation, metal ore, in manufacturing. So if we can go to the next slide. So it is quite evident that SEZs do make a huge contribution and difference. So, special economic zones, also I looked at different research areas. They do have incentive packages. I saw one question for the previous set of presenters in the first session was being asked about incentive packages, whether or not they make a difference and so on. So we know that special economic zones programs usually come with an incentive package for just to attract investment and investors to locate and have a land uptake in the different SEZs. And those have been proven to work, but they cannot work, in their sole capacity. There has to be so many different offerings over and beyond incentive packages to make this whole program work. So sometimes in some countries you find there is an incentive package offering which is being introduced, but then you find that it's not being offered optimally, and that doesn't always work. So those are some of the challenges in management as well. We can go to the next slide. And also in terms of opportunities, we have deepened value chain opportunities around SEZs, as we have small and micro businesses locating and manufacturing and so forth. And also we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is rolling out, which is an opportunity for SEZs in Africa and for interregional trade as well. And in terms of recommendations, the main recommendation is around funding for SEZs to be more profit-driven, and for governments to allow for private players to play a role in terms of management and in ensuring that they reduce the burden on the fiscus and become more resourceful, more resilient, and also so that they meet, you know, the end result of economic growth for the different regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mashao. Just to remind the audience that that presentation is from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. So we move to the next presentation on the influence of capacity building on economic empowerment of small-scale agro-processors. I would ask Benjamin to load the presentation. Meanwhile, Benjamin is from the University of Free State, and the paper is co-authored with Victor Bengwa from the University of Limpopo, and also with Joseph Lekuze from Northwest Business School. So this will be the last presentation for the session. So I'm going to hand over to Benson, please. Note that you have about 12 to 14 minutes presentation so that we can have enough time for questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Benjamin.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity, the convener of the session, and good morning to everyone. My presentation is part of my PhD study, through the University of Northwest. I'm currently, on a part-time basis, I'm based at the University of the Free State. The study actually is around the influence of capacity building on the economic empowerment of small-scale agro-processors in the country, South Africa, looking at the implications of that on industrial development. The contents of my slides, I'll cover one, introduction and the background of the study. I'll look at the research methodology, touching on the study area, the research design, data analysis, as well as the model specifications. I'll then spend more time on the study's key findings. Lastly, I'll look at the policy implications, recommendations, as well as conclusion of the study. Briefly, the agro-processing sector or industry, comprises of manufacturing activities which are transform raw material, intermediate products from agriculture, forestry and fisheries into finished products. And in the country, the sector actually contributes greatly in terms of the employment creation, as well as the contribution towards the GDP as well. And in the number of studies, also number of scholars have actually, identified, the agro-processing sector as one of the critical sectors where, or drivers for industrialization. In the country, in South Africa specifically, there are pieces of legislations which are very, very clear in terms of the role of agro-processing on industrial development. One of those is the New Growth Path, which was passed in 2010. We currently have the National Development Plan 2030. We've got the various versions of the Industrial Policy Action Plan, which all of them have actually identified agro-processing as one of the key drivers for industrialization, which has a huge potential towards a structural transformation of the economy. Again, we have Mazwinga as well. Who confirms the same narration that the agro-processing industry actually contributes towards the industrialization. However, despite all the challenges, despite the opportunities coming out of agro-processing towards the industrialization, the sector still operates within below capacity due to the absence of capacity building. Because the reason is that most of the agro-processors lack technical know-how, and that is why they are not actually performing at the level which they're expected to perform at. And the industry remains underdeveloped largely without significant institutional, technical, and financial support. And in terms of various studies, I mean, which shows the link between the capacity building and industrialization and also in, I mean, economic growth. I mean, the study shows that capacity building contributes towards economic growth through, I mean, social development of local people. And this study actually, I mean, our study actually is based on the human capital theory, which insinuates that educated population is productive. I mean, it says that if people are educated, definitely to be able to provide, I mean, to be able to increase on their production and which will contribute towards industrial development. The study actually was focused on 5 provinces within South Africa. I mean, we had our respondents coming from Limpopo, Northwest Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and the Free State. And we used the sequential exploratory mixed method research, and we used some stratified probability sampling technique. I mean, to select respondents from the 5 provinces, and we had a sample size of 500 respondents. And of the 500, we managed to get 503 respondents, which gave us over 100 response rates on the study. And our responders actually were supposed to meet criteria. I mean, set of criteria. One, they were supposed to be, I mean, running a business. I mean, a small scale agro processing enterprise. They're supposed to be located within the study area, and we're supposed to have either, if they are foreign nationals, they're supposed to have a valid work permit. If they are local, they're supposed to produce an identity when they were interviewed. I mean, we used a semi-structured questionnaire. And the study, I mean, was given, I mean, ethical clearance approval by the Northwest University, and the respondents were also, I mean, asked to, I mean, to give, I mean, written and verbal consent to the data collectors. And in terms of data analysis, quickly, we used, I mean, 2 data analysis techniques because this was a mixed method study. We had to analyze, I mean, descriptive statistics and also analyze inferential statistics. We then analyzed, I mean, the socioeconomic profile of respondents using descriptive, and then we analyzed, I mean, the relationship between capacity building and with using multiple regression analysis. I'm not gonna go. I mean, this is how the model. I'm not gonna go into it in the interest of time. I'm not gonna go spend time on the descriptive statistics per se, but just to mention that. Majority of the respondents were female-owned enterprises, and they also show that, I mean, most of them did not have their schooling was below actually secondary level schooling. Majority of the respondents, and most of them they were self-employed because they were running the businesses, I mean, which they own themselves. And also, I mean, they were asked about their agro-processing specialty. I mean, their position within the business as well as the educational background and the years of experience in the business. And majority of them, most of them, they were, I mean, having over 5 years experience running their own businesses. Then, and there were 2 critical variables which we wanted the respondents to respond on. I mean, ask them about the, I mean, if infrastructure, I mean, contributes, I mean, significantly to their economic empowerment. The transformation initiative by government contributes significantly to the empowerment, and if capacity building contributes significantly. And then if you look at the beta, my apologies, let me just go back quickly. If you look at the beta there, the capacity building, capacity building had a 0.073 beta as compared to transformation initiatives of 0.056. and infrastructure services of 0.26. I mean, what it says here is that the majority of the respondents says capacity building actually significantly has an impact on the economic empowerment as compared to access to, I mean, transformation activities as well as access to infrastructure. Then we went further and asked them, I mean, if they, I mean, looking at the different types of capacity building initiatives, which ones actually contribute significantly towards their empowerment, and they were given options on mentorship, on sorry, my apologies. They were given options on mentorship, on technical skills, on leadership skills, access to information, as well as financial skills. And of all those, I mean, the variables, they indicated that if you look at the current batch alpha on the far left, I mean, you can see that the financial skills, I mean, had the highest score of 0.756, followed by mentorship with a score of 0.75, followed by technical skills, leadership skills, access to information. What it says here is that the respondents actually are saying that financial skills actually will contribute significantly to their economic empowerment, and this is correct, because if you look at most small scale agro processors, I mean, they are running their businesses informally, so, and some of them, I mean, don't even have bank accounts. They keep money. I mean, they receive money on daily basis, and they keep the money, I mean, with themselves, and that's why sometimes they might be using the money for other activities than their businesses, and that's why they rated financial skills as one of the critical issues. But the second most important issue is on mentorship, which is very, very critical, and technical skills as well, because most of them they don't have technical know-how of processing their primary products into finished products. Even if they've got the skills, they don't have the latest technology for them to be able to do that. And in terms of the major finding is that one, I mean, the study reveals that capacity building significantly influences the economic empowerment of small-scale agro processors as compared to infrastructure, resources, and transformation. And since most of the small-scale processors in South Africa are women-owned businesses, I mean, we recommend that, I mean, the intervention should be targeted to women-owned enterprises. The study also reveals that, I mean, mentorship, financial and technical skills are critical for capacity building. I mean, and which influences, I mean, the economic empowerment of these small agro processors. Therefore, it is recommended the South African government should prioritize invest in mentorship, provision of financial and technical skills program in order to achieve, I mean, the economic empowerment of the agro processors, and in turn, I mean, contribute towards industrial development. Again, it is recommended government should develop policy and programs to support capacity building of small-scale processors, and also invest in capacity in order to achieve the economic empowerment agenda of the country. And because most of the capacity building, programs are offered through, I mean, agricultural extension officers, I mean, they should be, empowered to be able to provide those skills. And also the economic empowerment of small agro processors through capacity building, which will contribute towards the country's industrialization and structural transformation agenda. And in conclusion, in order to achieve increased industrialization and structural transformation, the capacity building program should include training of small-scale processors in technical skills such as using advanced manufacturing tools and machinery, since most of the small-scale processors process the product manually or through use of old production technologies. That's the last end of my slide, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benjamin. We're now going to take questions. I can see some questions on the chat. I think we will start with those, but if you have other questions, you can raise your hand or you can also put it on the chat. So we start with a question for Marshall. There's a question there from Santos Bila. It's on the effectiveness of special economic zones. And given that they get, large fiscal incentives, can you see the question on the chat, or should I read it out for you?
Please read it out for me, thank you.
Okay, maybe a quick follow-up on the effectiveness of special economic zones. My understanding has been that most African countries run tax redundancy due to granting large fiscal incentive packages without necessarily looking at improving institutions and institutions making the fiscal incentives second order element for FDI decision making. Would you say these policies, that is exemptions and so on, have to be eliminated, or we would have to address infrastructure and institutions before we can think of relying on tax policy and industrial policy. So that is a long question there. And related to that is a question from Gwen Foster, and it asking whether you considered information infrastructure such as computers and communications in your study on EPZ. So let's start with Mashao, if you can please respond to those questions.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, when it comes to tax policy and offering incentives, I do not think that African countries necessarily have to eliminate those. I think that they can be offered concurrently with everything else in the midst of all the challenges that we have. Because I say this mainly because even though most incentives are being part of the marketing offering, when investors need to are being would to locate within African SEZs, not all of them are actually being offered fully. So in most instances, it's just part of the marketing, but there've been investors who have complained that, when they were coming to locate within an African SEZ, they thought they would get, for example, a certain corporate tax, but it's still not being implemented because, most are offered over quite a bit of time, sometimes depending on the profit levels of the entity which is located and so forth. So I don't think we can say, and this I'm saying not specific to an SEZ, but looking at Africa as a whole in general, that because it's not tax incentives are not being offered fully, then we cannot say, let's stop and so forth. I think the most important thing is how a special economic zone is managed, trying to get special economic zones to have a lesser reliance on public fiscus, because that is what is happening in African countries, just to look at whether we can have more private-public partnership SEZs, or even privately owned SEZs, so that they're profit-driven, and also in the way they can access funding. Are they allowed to apply for a loan, for example, and so forth? And how do we make them more sustainable? I think that would be the most important thing. And then in terms of infrastructure, it is very important because we're looking at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we have a vision of interregional trade. So improving on infrastructure is very, very important. Also external infrastructure in terms of transport networks and deepening our value chains and working together. And also within the special economic zones as well. So I'm coming to the second question about whether we're looking at computers and so on and so on. Like when I was explaining the definition of an SEZ is, it's not just a piece of land which just has a fence, but SEZs have a dedicated demarcation, which is also monitored by a revenue services entity. So you also have machines and computers and tracking of what is coming in and what is going out, especially that they have a mandate for being export orientated. So there's a lot of technology that is required to ensure that also data is being tracked, but also the products that are coming in and out of the enclave. So thank you. That will be my response.
Yeah, there's another question. If we can just take all your question, given the electricity supply, given that electricity supply is important, how are ECZs cope with load shedding and energy issues in South Africa? I'm just summarizing the question. If you can respond to that, Mashao.
Thank you so much. Yes, load shedding is a huge It's a huge, challenge in South Africa. But also beyond load shedding, we live in an era where we have to leapfrog into using cleaner technologies, because that's the trajectory which was beneficial, for everybody, even globally. And we've been looking at, special economic zones have been looking at ways of, relying at a lesser extent on electricity, and they've been trying to sort of broaden their energy mix. So we've had special economic zones such as Richards Bay, which have been implementing a solar farm to supply the entire zone. We have Atlantis, which is a sector-specific zone. So when they were designated so that they focus on green and renewable technologies. And then in some areas, we have zones which have a number of sectors within them, and they are exploring renewable energy. They have solar panels, they have solar farms, and all sorts of hybrid offerings. And some are even at certain hours not affected by load shedding. So we have, like, for example, if you look at hospitals, you cannot have load shedding in hospitals. So in some industrial areas, you do have that offering, which has been negotiated between municipalities and special economic zones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mashao. We'll move on to some questions for Manasoe. The first question is from Gwen Foster and is asking, did your study consider markets available and target market requirements? Manasoe? Your study on agro-processing.
No. Thank you very much, facilitator. I think the first question on the target market. No, my study did not. Take into consideration the target market. And secondly, on the infrastructure question, yes, we did ask them about access technology issues, computers and machineries and factory space and the like. That those were covered. And there was a question. There's a comment actually around the issues around the ratios used. I was trying to explain that. My results mainly on the inferential research were based on the multiple regression analysis, and I tried to explain that mainly on the issue on slide number, I think on the beta issues, I looked at the one which has the highest beta. The beta, for example, capacity building has the highest beta, and that's what I did not look at the other factors due to time, but I was looking at the one which has the highest beta, as well as on the issues around the variables of capacity building. I looked at the ground price alpha. Looked at the one which has the highest ground price alpha, and those were the ones which has a significant influence on the capacity building. Thanks.
Thank you, Benjamin. Are there questions for Lesego before we take more questions for Mashao and Benjamin? You can raise your hand or you can put it on the chat. Okay, as we wait for the questions, I have a question for Benjamin. How do you reconcile, your findings with those that have with the studies that have been done in South Africa? For example, finding that more women participate in the empowerment initiatives, while other studies find it's men. And what are the implications of your studies' findings on government policy, implications for industrialization?
No, sir, thanks. Just that I don't have my paper with me here, but I think there's a general agreement that most of the studies, participants in the small scale agro-processing are women. Most of the studies agree that the small scale agro-processing activities, there are a lot of women participating in that as compared to men. Whereas there are other studies which, shows that, more men are participating as compared to women. But generally they are, the study actually is concur with number of studies, around the gender representation within the small scale agro processing sector. And around the industrial, around the implications of the study, I'm saying that because what is happening here is that government has invested a lot around economic empowerment programs such as providing capacity building for women and emerging entrepreneurs as well. My view is that there should be more dedicated support to women. To small scale agro processors mainly. Or we need to invest a lot of resources on mentorship, because there's not enough for a person to attend one day program and think that those people will then be specialists in a particular space or a particular area. Then if we can invest more resources on mentorship programs, so that one agricultural advisor will be allocated about 5 to 10 small scale agro processors to mentor over a period of time, that can assist in ensuring that they're able to understand what they need to do, but they also are able to contribute toward industrial development or industrialization in the country. But at the moment, if we just offer them 1 or 2 day courses, that is not sufficient. And that's why if you look at one of the critical factors there is mentorship, which is very, very critical for me. But also mention that issues around financial skills are very, very critical. And it's because most of our small scale agro processors, they run their business on cash basis. They receive money mostly on every day, which is a bit of a challenge. I think maybe we need to start looking at how can we then assist them so that they can accept. They can use cashless payment systems, so that they are not receiving cash on daily basis, which will assist them to be able to manage their financial resources.
Thank you, Benjamin. We're still waiting for more questions from the audience. Meanwhile, I have a question for Lesego. I saw you have only 4 control variables. Just wondering how you justify your chosen controls. And I was even thinking you could include something on global value chains, given that a lot of FDI in Lesotho could be driven by that. I'm just trying to ask the interlinkage between global value chains and investment in the manufacturing sector in Lesotho, and also asking about your control variables. I saw you only have 4. How do you justify your choice of the control variables? Thank you. Let's
Okay, yes. Thank you for the question. Yes, we could have added more control variables, especially we thought about incorporating the institutional variables such as the political stability, government effectiveness, and many more other variables, like you're rightly saying. But one of the problems we had was with the data availability. For instance, we investigated the data set spans from 1981 to 2020. But if you look at for instance, institutional variables, which are also very key in this kind of study, we only have data from 1996 for such variables. And also one of the things we could have included the variable that you just suggested now, but we're also concerned about the multicollinearity of the variables as well. So that's why we did not include a lot of variables, and also it was based on the availability of the data. That is one of the reasons why we did not include a lot of variables. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesego. I think we out of time. It's now 11:45, and thank you so much to all the presenters, and thank you also to all those who asked questions. And we'll move to the next session, And over to the moderator. Thank you very much.